Hey guys, this is John. I'm playing Sviswa in the 15-minute pool on ICC. So my opponent opens with d4. Let's play knight f6. And I think I'm going to look to play like a Nimzo structure if allowed, but they play knight f3 instead. Let's play c5 in this case. I like c5, a bit of an aggressive move. Yeah, they seem bent on playing now a Colle, it looks like. So just reinforcing their pawn. I can play e6. I can take on d4. I can do a number of things. Let's play e6. This may end up looking similar to a game I had previously in the 15-minute category, a couple posted videos ago. Let's go b6. So I'm going to put the bishop on b7. The difference here is, though, that their bishop is locked inside the pawn chain. So it's on c1. It's blocked by their e3 pawn. It's a bit better, in my opinion, to have that bishop out on f4, as in the London system. So he's going to fianchetto it and try to make the most of the bishop on the a1, h8 diagonal, but still I think it's better to have it out on f4. Okay, let's play bishop b7. Probably we'll both castle. Okay, he plays a3. That move's not going to hurt him. I don't know if it's the best move right now. I don't see a particular point to it. Let's just castle. Knight bd2. Hereabouts, I'm going to start thinking about what to do with the pawn tension, whether I want to take on d4 and probably compel him to recapture with the e-pawn, or whether I want to keep that tension and continue developing. So I could play d6 or d5. Both approaches would be fine. I'm going to take, though, because I think he's likely to take with a pawn, and then I like the look of getting in d5. I know I'm blocking in my light square bishop by doing this, but I gain some nice central control. Also, I can bring this knight to d7 if I want. Probably he'll play c4 at some point. I might have the option of taking and giving him hanging pawns. So knight c6 or knight bd7. What's the call? There's also knight e4 if I want to try to establish a nice piece in the middle, but I think if knight e4 he'll take, I take with the d-pawn. I'm not sure having doubled pawns is that great for me this early on. I'm trying to recall what I did previously in this structure. Not in the aforementioned game, but I played a game against this guy RRK in the 15-minute pool, and I liked what I did with this queenside knight, but I'm struggling to recall it. Like somehow I was able to get it to f5. So maybe knight c6, bishop d6, knight e7, coming over to f5, but that seems slow. I mean, c6, or I faced this dilemma too in the last London system game about where to put the knight. This early, it may not even matter that much. Both moves are playable. Let's put it on c6. So we'll try to keep it a bit more active. I know the b4 square is covered. Maybe in the future it can go to a5, though, especially if c4 and we take and we saddle him with hanging pawns. So now I'll be looking to play rook c8 and see what happens down the c-file. Yeah, let's just play this move. And I'll check my opponent's stats. Just curious what kind of ratio, win-loss ratio he has. So my opponent's played 184 games, 98 wins, 80 losses, peak rating of 1916. He does play c4. So if I take, they're likely to take with a pawn, because if they don't, they would have an isolated d-pawn. So let's say d takes c4, b takes c4, maybe knight a5. But c4 is well guarded. They have it defended 3 times by the light square bishop, the knight, and the rook on c1. Maybe I could play d takes c4, b takes c4, bishop d6, get our bishop on a more desirable diagonal, and then knight e7 and try to bring the knight over to the king side. That would be a reasonable plan, I think. I could also play bishop d6 immediately, but then they might have a reason to play c5 with tempo on my bishop. So let's take. We'll play it this way and see. Now I was thinking bishop to d6. Yeah, let's do it. I like the fact that if knight e5, I can take with the bishop, and then they have fractured pawns. Then the c and a pawns would be isolated. The a pawn's already isolated, but especially the c pawn would be isolated. I can also continue with that knight e7 plan, as I was saying, if I want to unleash my light square bishop and maybe maneuver my knight over to f5 or possibly g6. Queen e7 is another potential idea, hitting the pawn on a3. Hanging pawn positions are no less interesting than isolated pawn positions because they come with their own set of dynamics. Rook e1, so now I'm a little less likely to put the queen on e7, I think, because it would be a move or two away from being exposed. Like in the event that white played d5 and I took with my e-pawn, they could move this light square bishop and expose my queen to an attack. So maybe knight e7. I can also play rook e8, just bide my time, but I think they'll play bishop f1, most likely. At the moment, though, do I really have to be concerned about queen e7 and d5? I can take, pawn takes. I can even play knight a5 there. If bishop a6, let's say, opening up an attack on my queen and also hitting that bishop, I could just move my queen. That looks simple enough. Something about queen e7 doesn't look quite right, though. Queen c7 maybe is decent. Maybe just play that move. Yeah, that looks like a better way. Although queen c7 d5 can be played. Aha. Queen c7 d5, and if pawn takes d5, bishop takes f6 is a problem. Then I take with my g-pawn. It's bad enough that my pawn structure would be questionable there, but also he can recapture on d5 and I'm pinned along the c-file. So that's something to avoid. And again, I think if rook e8 just trying to play a useful move, they're probably going bishop f1. And the ball's going to be right back in my court. So now I'm looking at that knight e7 move again. Let's do it. And if knight e5, I still might take. So knight e5, bishop takes, d takes e5, knight d7. I have a better pawn structure. That d7 knight can go to c5. It'll be well placed there. Opening up the light square bishop is nice. You can still think about playing d5. d5, e takes d5, bishop takes f6. G takes f6, c takes d5. That would be a pawn sack for him. I don't know that white gets compensation, full compensation there. After c takes d5, I can play bishop takes d5, stopping knight e4. But this move is worth considering. d5 at the moment. Just plays bishop d3. Okay. Maybe now knight g6. If knight g6, probably g3 will be played, I'm guessing. Stop my knight from coming into f4. Bishop f4 could be an annoyance for them at the moment. Bishop f4, g3, bishop h6. That way they can't play knight e4 so easily. Also, if bishop f4, g3, I have bishop takes f3. And then regardless of whether they take with the queen or the knight, they're losing something. This could be a clever little move. Let's do it. So you have g3 if he just loses his focus for a moment and plays that move to attack my bishop, thinking I have to retreat. Then bishop takes f3. If knight takes f3, bishop takes c1. I'm up the exchange. And if queen takes f3, I have bishop takes d2, which is even worse for him. So let's see if he notices the threat. Also, there's kind of just a positional threat. Taking on f3 now, even without g3, and he'd have to take with a g-pawn for exactly the same reason. Queen takes would drop the knight. Maybe he should play like rook c2, a prophylactic move. Yeah, rook c2 or maybe rook c3 even. I would say rook c2 is the most logical. Then I could perhaps play bishop c6, threatening bishop a4, skewering his rook to his queen. So let's say rook c2, bishop c6, maybe queen e2, trying to escape that skewer. I'm creating some threats, but I don't know if any of these threats are going to lead to much beyond a couple tempo moves. If he defends carefully here, he shouldn't lose anything or compromise his position. But it is nice to play actively and disrupt his plans. I'd still like to find a function for this knight. I'm not sure it wants to go to g6 because of that g3 idea. Queen e2. Yeah, so I can take here now. And he'd have to take with a pawn. And I gotta believe that's undesirable for him. Yeah, I don't think there's much of anything else. This is clearly the best move for me. Yep, now g takes. And here, I would love to either attack h2 or maybe get my knight involved, like knight g6, and if this bishop moves, maybe I can get the knight into f4, or potentially just play knight g6 to h4. I could start with a move like queen c7 if I want, gain a tempo on that pawn. Knight g6 looks normal, though. My queen might want to stay here, because if knight g6, maybe knight h5, and I can swing the queen into, let's say, h4. What would he do about knight c6 as well here? Knight c6 just double attacking d4. How does he deal with that threat? Knight c6, d5. Pawn takes d5. Pawn takes d5. Yeah, I could just take with my knight there. Although there is queen e4. Queen e4, or bishop takes h7 and then queen e4 could be an issue. So many strong candidate moves right now. Let's take a look at those again. So knight c6 or knight g6 are my top candidates. Kind of looking at queen c7 a bit too. Knight c6 is the move that is screaming to me to be played right now. I think after knight c6, he has to roll the dice with d5. Maybe then after knight c6, d5, e takes d5, c takes d5, maybe I can just play rook e8. But then he has bishop takes f6. Rook takes e2, bishop takes d8, rook takes e1, check. It's getting messy. Rook takes e1, bishop takes d2, rook d1. Actually, does he have rook e8 mate there? Something about that line looks suspicious. So knight c6, d5, e takes d5, c takes d5. If I play queen takes d5, they can play bishop takes f6. G takes f6. My king is open. Knight e4 might be an issue, or queen e4. Still, though, I really want to play knight to c6. Knight c6, d5, e takes d5, c takes d5. Knight takes d5. If bishop takes h7 then, that doesn't work. I can just take, and my knight on d5 is defending the bishop. That took me a while to see. Okay, well in that case I think I should play this move. Attacking d4. I didn't pick up on that tactical detail till now. So if d5, e takes d5, c takes d5, I think I can safely play knight takes d5, even though that gives up control of e4, because queen e4, I could play probably a couple different things. Maybe queen g5 check then. Maybe even f5, although f5 is kind of weakening. g6 is probably okay. But I'm no longer really worried about that queen e4 move. d5, e takes d5, c takes d5, knight takes d5, queen e4, even just queen h4 is good enough there. Defending h7, and if queen takes d5, queen takes h2 check, king f1. At the very least, I think I can play bishop takes d2, attacking both of his rooks. Yeah, that should work out. Sometimes when you're spoiled for choice, you have a lot of good options and limited time to compare them. It's best just to go with one, and if they all look promising, just trust your gut, choose one that you think looks best, and play the position. Because the last thing you want is to get in time pressure because you're choosing between multiple good moves. Unless there's a way you can calculate the line to the end and there's some sort of forced variation. But all these lines like seem good for me, even though they seem marginally dangerous at the same time if you get stuff going against h7 or maybe g7. But for the most part, I'm liking my position. It'd be really nice after d5, e takes d5, c takes d5, just to be able to play rook e8. Because he's awkwardly placed along the e file. But bishop takes f6 kind of ruins that idea. And then I was looking at rook takes e2. Because if I take on f6, he's going to take on e8 with his queen. So I was looking at for bishop takes f6, rook takes e2, bishop takes d8, rook takes e1 check, rook takes e1, bishop takes d2, but I don't know if it works out. Let's say rook d1 then. I can take on d8, he takes d2. I think that's even material there. I'm trying not to expend too much mental energy looking at that line because I doubt it's going to happen, but we'll take a look at that in the analysis. I'm not sure what his best bet is here. Losing d4 would be pretty awful for him. But also sacrificing the exchange, like playing a move like knight b3 wasn't so appetizing either. Okay, so knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, queen takes d4. Any objections to that? He's probably playing knight e4 then. Nah, it looks good for me. Yeah, let's just bank that pawn. Nice to get his dark square bishop too. That's highly useful. So I'm expecting knight e4. I think he wants to open up the d file. Maybe a opposite color bishop endgame could be some sort of salvation for him. And if knight e4, queen e5 seems good. I could take on e4, but then after queen takes e4, he's threatening my queen and threatening queen takes h7 mate, so I'd have to simplify. So I think I like queen e5 even better. Threatening h2. And if knight takes f6 check, queen takes f6, we're up a pawn. We have a much better pawn structure. There's still going to be threats against his king. And that should be winning for us from a technical standpoint. He can play king h1 and try to put a rook on g1 thereafter, but as long as we are mindful of any potential g-file threats or threats on like g6, for instance, if I put a pawn there, it shouldn't be too tough. Pure bishop endgames are ones I might want to avoid, though, just due to the nature of the opposite color bishops, the notorious opposite color bishops, where games can be drawn even when you're down a pawn or two or sometimes even three. That bishop f4 move was very helpful. And then he didn't respond to it accurately. This queen e2 move was a mistake. I think he should have played rook c2. So that's another area we'll focus on in the postmortem. But for now, I just got to win this game. You know what's also an interesting idea in the present position is trying to go rook c5 and swinging the rook over to g5 or h5 if I can. If he plays knight e4, I might not have a chance to do that. But we'll see. I think pretty soon he's going to have to play king h1 and try to get the rook over to g1. Because that allows him to play rook g2 and defend h2 with another piece. h2 is a sore spot for him right now. He's spending some time here. I wouldn't spend this much time if I were him. I know we're roughly even, but the clock was the only advantage he really had. And now we're just playing a blitz game, basically. Maybe he can play knight f1 and try to come over to g3 and just try to shore up the g file and some of the squares around his king. That knight on f1 would help defend h2. If knight f1, he would be threatening bishop takes h7 check with a discovery on my queen. But I'm not worried. Knight f1, queen c5 looks like a good move. Attacking the pawn on a3, maybe allowing the queen to swing over. I'd say he should move the knight, though. Knight f1 or knight e4. Wonder if he's lagging. I'm just going to check his ping time just to see if he's lagging or not. Nope. He's there. If he's searching for something tactical to get out of this, it doesn't exist. He's just going to have to defend a much worse endgame now, most likely. Or middle game. Hopefully he does make a move soon, though, just so we have something to play out. Oh yeah, if knight b3, by the way, that was a move I haven't really looked at till now. I'm actually fortunate that I have queen c3 there. Because if I retreat anywhere along the d file, he would have bishop takes h7. So I was overlooking the possibility of knight b3 rather, but I do have queen c3 from the looks of it, attacking the knight and getting off that dangerous d file. I don't know what else he could be looking at here. He should just choose a knight move and go with it. Bishop takes h7, does not work at all. Even if I took with my king, it would be safe, but I can take with my knight, and I don't even have to expose my king. He can't create threats up the e-file with his queen, so that's not going to work for him. Okay, finally plays a move, queen f1. So maybe he's trying to send the queen to g2 or h3. I can take on d2 if I want. Bishop takes d2, rook takes d2, and that's an undefended rook right there. He would be threatening bishop takes h7. So let's say bishop takes d2, rook takes d2, queen c3, then I'm hitting the rook and also that a3 pawn. Maybe I can bring this rook over. Not bad. There's also bishop takes d2, rook takes d2, queen f4, attacking d2 and f3. I see you can play rook e3 in that case, though. Blocking my queen and defending this pawn. I like my dark square bishop. I don't know if I want to just trade that piece off. But if I get rid of his knight, that's like the only piece that can really do damage to me. So maybe I should do that. Yeah, I'll just play that. We'll keep it simple. I think with this time situation, too, he's going to be struggling here as well. So rook takes d2, queen c3. If rook c2, I'll take the pawn, and then if rook a1, I can come all the way back to e7, and a7 is defended. And I'd be up 2 pawns. Another reason for taking his knight is that I avoid any opposite color bishop endgames that can arise. Okay, so I can take here, and again, if rook a1, queen comes back to e7. It's a little greedy, but another pawn's another pawn. Let's do it. I mean, queen h3 is not threatening anything with my knight guarding it. So I think just bank another pawn, maybe come back to e7. Yeah, he just resigned. Okay, so let's have a look at this one. So he played knight f3 on move 2. I could play e6 like last game. in the London system, but I just decided to go c5. And this setup is good for black, so fianchettoing the light square bishop. Now that we have a pawn on e6, it's very unlikely the bishop's going to be able to come out this way, so fianchettoing it is your next best bet to activate it. And it has a nice diagonal to work with. I'm always a little torn because when you fianchetto this bishop in these structures, playing d5 as I did in the game makes a lot of sense as far as central control, but you do block that bishop's diagonal. So there are some players who like to operate with the pawn on d6 and leave that diagonal open. Here I decided to play d5, though. I think it's reasonable. And I had this dilemma, knight c6 or knight d7. It's a constant conundrum for black. Knight c6 is fine, though, I think. The fear with knight bd7 is that this knight has a hard time maneuvering anywhere because it's a bit superfluous with that knight being on f6, and it can't come anywhere towards the center. So I think I'd be looking at having to play like rook e8 and maybe knight f8, knight g6 thereafter. It just feels like it has a few more options on c6. And it also like disputes d4 a bit. Whether the knight's on d7 or c6, we do e5 as well, so we're observing that square. Okay, rook c8. Yep, d5. I just took, so I chose to saddle him with the hanging pawns, which refer to pawns that are side by side like that with no pawns on the other sides to support them. So those are hanging pawns. And just like isolated pawns, they come with their own set of dynamics. You have to be adept at handling the structure, otherwise you can find yourself in a position that's difficult to play. The main issue with these pawns is if they become blockaded, they lose a lot of their value. So white wants to use them dynamically, and if possible, d5 is a pawn break that white would love to achieve. If it happens under the right circumstances, black can really be caught off guard. So bishop d6, rook e1, and I played knight e7. Queen e7 is maybe playable too, attacking a3. I just expressed some concern about that when he has a rook on e1. Like d5 ideas are strengthened because of that, but maybe I can play that move. Knight e7. Oh yeah, and if I played queen c7, then like this is an example where d5 is working for black, for white in a hanging pawn situation. Opening the bishop, and if I take with my pawn, he takes on f6, in between move, before capturing on d5. And then if I recapture, c takes d5, and black is losing because I'm caught in a mortal pin along the c-file. I'm losing a piece. I can't move my knight. So there's moves like that to avoid. So I played knight e7. If the knight jumped into e5, maybe trying to take advantage of the fact that my knight is no longer on c6, I can take, and then after something like knight d7, I like the static nature of the pawn structure. This favors black greatly. They have isolated c and a pawns. The c5 square is perfect for my knight. This bishop is blocked by its own pawn on e5. Unless this knight can like come into d6 somehow, which is tough with this bishop on b7, then I think black should be better. Certainly in the long run, black is doing awesome here, but if they can weather the short-term tactics and attacking moves white throws at him, I love black's chances with this pawn structure. So he played bishop d3. I think that's reasonable. It opens the e-file. And here I played this tricky move, bishop f4. If knight g6, I just didn't like the fact that they could play g3 and keep my knight out of f4. And now there's no issue with bishop takes f3. So bishop f4 was kind of a sneaky way to introduce this as a tactical idea. And I don't know if they overlooked that. I mean, I assume, because g3 is like very natural in response to bishop f4, and I assume they saw that that was bad because of this. And then they're going to lose something like queen takes f3, bishop takes d2 is horrible, so they would have to play knight takes f3, and then we just bank in exchange. So I assume they saw that, but maybe they didn't think that I would take on f3 when their pawn is still guarding that knight. So queen e2, clear mistake. I think they should have played like rook c2, or maybe what the engine's saying, rook b1. Whoops. Rook b1, just get out of the pin along this diagonal. And now bishop takes f3 can be met by knight takes f3, so there's no tactics that black has. But it is nice that I would have forced a rook move with that bishop f4 move. But they play queen e2, and we take on f3. This is sometimes an unexpected capture. In fact, in one of my recent blitz games that you'll be seeing in a few days, a exchange of a fianchettoed bishop for one of my opponent's knights kind of caught him off guard and kind of propelled me into winning a game. So now he has to take with a pawn. He could sack an exchange, I guess. Knight takes f3, bishop takes c1. Now let's say bishop takes c1, maybe trying to reroute the bishop. White does have a pair of bishops, and I have no bishops, so I would have to be cautious here that I don't fall under attack. I feel like black should probably win this position, but there's a lot of resources left on the board, so maybe white could whip something up. It's interesting the computer prefers that approach to the approach in the game, g takes f3, like trying to hold on to the material, but after knight c6, it looks like they're going to lose the d-pawn. And I think with this pawn structure that white is left with, their position is pretty much in shambles. So even the computer, the materialistic computer, suggested giving up the exchange and keeping a good pawn structure as the best way to proceed. So here I was calculating d5, pawn takes d5, pawn takes d5, and for a while I was a little uncertain if this was good for black. It seemed fine, but I was mainly thinking of knight takes d5. And for a while, queen e4 was kind of concerning me until I realized that this knight defends the bishop. So the only threat is queen takes h7, which I can avert. I think I was looking at this line, queen h4, and if takes, then grab
Check.
here and take on d2 should be good. Forking these two rooks. Still have to watch my king a little bit, but my queen on h2 does a good job of monitoring h7. I don't think there's enough threats on like g5, for instance. You could see the eval. Yeah, black's pretty much winning. One important point is that if rook takes here, I have mate in 2. Queen h1, king e2,
checkmate.
queen takes e1. So he's not going to get like 2 minor pieces for the rook in that line. There might be better moves too. Actually, computer likes queen g5 here instead, throwing this check first. Would have king f1 then. Now queen h5. So defending here and attacking here. Not sure I would have played that. My queen is well placed on h5, though. I will say that. It helps defend d5, too. So, yeah, it doesn't seem like the tactics are working out. So they played rook cd1. Yeah, it's hard to offer white advice at this point. I mean, if d5 doesn't work, it's pretty dismal. The damage has been done to their position. Knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, queen takes d4. Yeah, and they spent way too long on this move. They spent 5.5 minutes on queen f1, and that just seals their fate. I could play suboptimally from here, and just the time situation is going to bite them with no increment. I mean, I think if you're white, your best bet is just to play something fast, like play a knight move, one of those knight moves I was referencing, like knight e4, and just hope for the best. I mean, try to pressure me on the clock. Try to get to like a drawish opposite color bishop endgame if you can. It's tough because I'm not going to let that happen, but maybe white had some practical chances of saving the game. It's interesting that I overlooked knight b3 for a while, and I'm fortunate that I have this move, queen c3, because when I took on d4, like knight b3 didn't really enter into my thought process. I was looking at knight e4, and knight e4 is fine. I can even play a move, I think, like this, because they're not threatening much with the discoveries. Like if knight takes f6, trying to open up bishop takes h7, I can just recapture here and sidestep that. I probably would have played queen e5, though. I think queen e5 is best, just to prophylactically sidestep. That's kind of redundant. Prophylactically sidestep. Just to play prophylactically and stop any d-file business before it becomes a big problem. And attack h2 as well. But they played queen f1. I just took on d2, eliminating probably the only piece that can give me problems. Yeah, now queen c3, hitting the rook, hitting this. Yeah, and they soon resigned. I won another pawn, and they could play it out, but down 2 pawns and no viable targets, I can't blame them for throwing in the towel. So this game really hinged on that queen e2 moves, allowing bishop takes f3. I think if white would have moved this rook, c2 or b1, we would have a dynamically level game on our hands, and it would have been interesting to see. But also interesting to see how black plays after white damages their pawn structure. So, hope you guys enjoyed this one. I'll be back tomorrow with another video. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.